Hello bedtime explorer, tonight we're going to walk the deserts of the Arabian Peninsula, long before the slick shine of oil wells, long before the sound of drilling machinery replaced the hush of sandstorms. You're lying under an open sky now, so wide and clear it might swallow you whole. The air smells faintly of fire smoke and cardamom, and the world feels older than it looks. Here, the ground doesn't rush. Time doesn't sprint. It waits, heavy as a camel's saddle, slow as the stars above. You'll hear the groan of worn leather, the clink of copper kettles, and the long whistle of a shepherd's flute as he calls to goats who, frankly, don't seem interested. Of course, you probably won't survive this if you wander too far alone, unless you can read starlight like a map and find water from a shadow. Which you can't. Yet. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments, where are you listening from, and what time is it where you are? Now, dim the lights, take a deep breath, close your eyes, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're sitting near a fire in the open sand, wrapped in a heavy wool bisht, the kind that smells like goat and wind. Around you, the tribe murmurs quietly, brewing strong coffee in a soot-blackened pot, pouring it into small cups with no handles. The men sip first with the right hand. Always the right. That's the rule. And there are many rules here. Some you follow. Some you'll break by accident. But you'll learn. A boy tosses dry brush onto the fire. The flames pop, and the sparks shoot up toward the stars, which are absolutely ridiculous out here, thousands of them. Too many to name, yet every header knows them. They are compass, calendar, and bedtime story all at once. You squint toward the horizon, where the dark outline of a camel sits like a forgotten mountain. It hasn't moved in an hour. Neither has the man beside it. One of the elders starts a story. It begins as all good stories do, with sand, loss, and a knife that belonged to a man who walked farther than the sun. His voice is slow, cracked like desert clay, and you lean in to hear the tale. There are no written books here. No paper libraries. Just mouths and ears, passing knowledge like water. You chew on a dried fig as he speaks. It's tough, like everything out here, but sweet at the core, again, like everything out here. Mainstream fact, nomadic oral storytelling was the main vehicle of history, law, and education in pre-oil Arabia. These stories preserved genealogies, tribal lore, and moral lessons, often delivered around fires in evening gatherings. Many tribes employed designated poets, or sho'air, who were both entertainers and historians. The stars, meanwhile, are not just decorations. You learn their names, Suha, Aldebaran, Al-Thuraya, and what they mean. Suha is so faint you can barely see it, but old men test their eyesight by finding it. It's become a metaphor in poems, for the beloved you can't quite reach. Fringe tidbit, in some tribes, stargazing was a matchmaking ritual. A boy would recite verses about the constellations while a girl listened. If she corrected him, or added a better rhyme, it was considered a sign of interest. And the fire? It's more than warmth. It's a signal. Fires placed atop small dunes can be seen for miles, warnings, welcomes, or sometimes just a way to say, "We are here," in a place where no one should be. You notice a red mark painted on the nearest camel's saddle. Not decoration. That's a clan mark, proof that the camel belongs to someone. Camel theft, by the way, is a capital offense. You don't touch someone else's camel unless you want your bones to become part of the sand. An old woman appears beside you and drops a small leather pouch into your lap. Dried herbs and crushed seeds. For snakes, she says, before walking away like a ghost. You're not sure whether it's meant to attract them or scare them off. The night deepens. Your eyes get heavier. The fire dims. Far off, a dog barks, then silence. There are no cities yet. No highways. No engines humming in the dark. Only breath, wind, and old stories wrapping around you like blankets. Historians still argue whether early desert tribes were more migratory or semi-settled. The archaeological evidence is patchy, stone circles here, hearth remains there. But the oral traditions suggest constant movement, always chasing the next rain, the next green patch, the next moonrise. You begin to doze. Someone hands you another fig. Or maybe you imagine it. The night is good at blending dreams with memory. The stars shift again, as if rearranging themselves into the next story. Don't worry. We're just getting started. The morning doesn't so much arrive as emerge, faint blue at the edge of your vision, a little colder than it should be, whispering light into the folds of the tent. You're on a woven mat that has exactly 3 pebbles under it, all in the wrong places. Someone outside is already boiling water over coals, and you can hear the metal cups clinking. You push aside the tent flap, and the desert greets you with that dry, unsmiling face it always wears. It's beautiful, yes, but in the way a lion is beautiful. It could eat you if it wanted to. The camp is already in motion. Tents coming down. Camels snorting. Women strapping bundles of cloth, tools, and goatskin water bags onto donkeys. There's no announcement. No shouted orders. Everyone just knows what to do, like the world has rehearsed this 1,000 times. You spot a child packing dates into a pouch. She's pressing them down like they're coins, precious, sticky coins. You'll learn that dates are basically the batteries of the Arabian Peninsula. Long shelf life, easy to carry, absurdly sweet, and full of energy. Want to travel for 5 days straight without collapsing? Bring dates. The tribe is moving today, not out of boredom, but necessity. The grazing ground is drying out. The animals are growing nervous. The wells here are shallow and starting to taste like metal. So, it's time to go. Find another patch of green. Chase a better sky. You climb onto a camel, well, no, actually you attempt to climb. The camel does not care for your efforts. It stands abruptly, and for one horrifying moment, you're tilted forward at a perfect 45-degree angle, about to become part of the sand. But then it levels out. Grudgingly. These creatures are the ships of the desert, but they sail with attitude. You begin to move. slowly. The caravan stretches long behind and ahead, like a string of brown shadows sliding over the earth. The rhythm of camel steps and wind and jingling harness bells lulls you into a state between waking and dreaming. Mainstream fact: before oil, the Arabian Peninsula relied heavily on the caravan trade. Routes like the Incense Road and the frankincense trails linked Arabia to Egypt, Mesopotamia, and even India. Caravans carried not only spices and resins, but also cloth, salt, glass beads, and stories, always stories. You pass a ruined watchtower around midday. Just a crumbling stone structure on a hill. Someone died there, probably. Or many someones. No one talks about it. Everyone just glances at it and moves on. The desert is littered with history, but not all of it wants to be remembered. There's a man walking beside your camel. He's got a curved dagger on his belt and a leather water skin slung across his back. He doesn't speak much, but when you ask about the tower, he just shrugs and says, "It belonged to someone who wasn't strong enough." OF. Later, you ask another traveler why some people ride donkeys instead of camels. She tells you camels are too proud. Donkeys are patient. The donkey doesn't dream of war. It just walks. And then she gives you a fig. Again. Always with the figs. Fringe tidbit: some old Bedouin stories claim that camels can smell water underground from over 5 miles away, and that if you follow a camel in the early morning without guiding it, it will always lead you to a hidden spring. Whether that's true or not is, frankly, up to the camel. The sun burns high now. The sand turns pale and blinding. Scarves go over faces. I squint. You've never drunk so much water in your life. And still, your lips feel like sandpaper. You start to understand why mirages exist. Not because the heat makes you hallucinate, but because your mind gets desperate. You want there to be a pool just over the next dune. You want the air to shimmer into an oasis. Historians still argue whether the early Bedouin migrations were purely seasonal or if they followed a more complex trade schedule that tied into lunar calendars. Some scholars think these movements were so precise that they functioned like mobile towns, entire communities folding up and unfolding again like tents. Eventually, the caravan stops near a cluster of scrubby trees and a rock shelf. Not quite an oasis, but good enough. Water is pulled from a hidden spring behind the rocks. The animals are fed. Fires are lit. You sit down, legs aching, and sip cardamom coffee so bitter it wakes up parts of your soul you didn't know were asleep. An elder begins chanting a poem as the sun sets. The lines are long and winding, full of metaphors about rivers that don't exist, and lions that may never have roared. It's beautiful. You don't understand half of it, but it settles into your chest like music. You lie back on a woven mat, gazing up at a sky that hasn't changed in 10,000 years. The wind hisses across the sand like a warning, or a lullaby. Hard to tell. You think about that watchtower again. About forgotten places and people whose names were never written down. And you wonder, when they moved like this, when they rode across the earth with their lives packed in leather and wool, did they feel free? You close your eyes. Tomorrow, the tribe reaches a trading station, one with stories carved into the walls and coins that jingle from distant lands. But for now, there is only this fire, this wind, and the deep silence that comes when humans are very small, and the desert is very large. By the time the sun pushes its way up again, you're already in motion, woken not by an alarm, but by the sound of goats arguing with ropes and a woman laughing in her throat while grinding barley in a bowl as wide as your chest. There's no time to stretch luxuriously, your body just accepts the ache and moves on. Desert life does not wait for you to feel ready. The terrain today is different, flatter, windier, the sand finer and more like flour. And your nose tells you something else, you're approaching a station. A trading stop. Maybe even a seasonal market. Because suddenly the wind isn't just dust and camel breath, it's carrying hints of spices. You can't see it yet, but your caravan knows. The camels quicken a little, almost like they're excited to rest. Or maybe they just want to drop their loads and eat in peace. You crest a rocky slope, and there it is, a clutch of stone buildings curled up next to a well like cats around a fire. This isn't a permanent city, no plumbing, no city walls, but it's a station that people have returned to for generations. A place where goods pass hands, stories get traded like coins, and, if you're lucky, someone offers you dried apricots without charging. People emerge like beetles from the cracks. Women with veils embroidered in blue thread, men with curved swords tucked into colorful belts, children clutching baskets of dried fish and little carved animals made from soapstone. It's not quite chaotic. It's bustling, in that confident way marketplaces always are. You're handed a handful of silver beads and a warning, don't get tricked. Then they send you off to learn the ways of bartering, Arabian style. Here's a crash course, never accept the first price. Laugh like it's the most ridiculous number you've ever heard. Offer something so insulting that they laugh. Meet somewhere in the middle. Walk away twice for dramatic effect. You end up with a pouch of saffron threads, 2 hand-woven armbands, a piece of glass that looks like it once belonged to a shattered palace window, and, unintentionally, a very determined goat that now follows you everywhere. No one seems keen to claim it. Mainstream fact, long before oil reshaped everything, the Arabian Peninsula thrived as a trade corridor. Stations like this one were part of the ancient incense trade routes, where merchants exchanged frankincense, myrrh, spices, silks, pearls, and dyed cloth with regions as far away as India, Africa, and the Mediterranean world. A woman at the edge of the market sits beneath a red tent, painting tiny geometric designs on ceramic tiles. She offers you a drink, sour milk and honey, warm from the sun, and asks what tribe you come from. You answer, and she smiles in that way old people do when they know more than they'll say. Your people once brought lapis lazuli from the east, she says. Stones that looked like stars. You've always followed the shimmer. Fringe tidbit, ancient Arab traders sometimes used star charts stitched into leather to navigate, not just in the open sea, but on land. A few families still pass these maps down, though modern scholars can barely read them. Some even believe they encoded secrets about hidden oases and forgotten tombs. You spend time exploring the alleys of this half-station half-village. There are broken pots embedded into the walls for decoration, iron braziers shaped like birds, and handprints painted in ochre on the rocks. Every corner feels older than it looks. You hear a baby crying. A lullaby in a language you can't quite place. You smell sandalwood, camel dung, fire, cinnamon, the sharp bite of vinegar. Somewhere, someone's playing a flute. You come across a man sitting cross-legged with scrolls laid out before him. His beard is streaked with silver, and his eyes are sharp as polished flint. He waves you closer and lets you look. Maps. Not the tidy ones you're used to, with neat country names and river lines. These are more like dreams, jagged coastlines, scribbled notes, skull symbols, and strange arrows pointing to cursed valleys. He tells you he's looking for a lost city, Ubar, the Atlantis of the sands. Swallowed by the earth, he says. Too rich, too proud. God buried it. He touches a blackened coin. But I will find it. Historians still argue whether Ubar truly existed. Some say it was a mythical city invented to warn against greed. Others believe it was a thriving caravan hub destroyed by shifting sands or an earthquake. NASA satellite images in the 1990s did reveal old caravan routes and a collapsed limestone cave, possibly supporting the legend. But the debate remains. You don't buy a map, but he gives you a single copper coin with strange markings and tells you to keep it. Just in case, he says, you find a door. As evening comes, the station transforms. Fires crackle in low pits. Shadow puppets dance across tent walls. Men gather around pipes and card games. A young boy balances on a rock, reciting poetry for coins. Someone passes around roasted locusts, giggling when you flinch. You sit beneath the stars, your belongings a little heavier now, your pockets stuffed with trinkets and your mind buzzing with rumors of hidden springs, of kingdoms buried beneath dunes, of spirits who guard lost tombs. Tomorrow, the caravan leaves at dawn. South, this time. Toward a coastal town, if the winds are kind. You don't know what you're searching for yet. But the more you listen, the more the old traders talk like there is something out there, waiting. You wake up to the distant murmur of prayers and the gentle crunch of feet over sand, soft, practiced, unhurried. The market station is already peeling itself apart, the way a traveling circus might. Tents are collapsing in waves, rolled and packed with the efficiency of muscle memory. By the time you chew your last date and tie your sandals, the caravan is already forming its line. Today, you're heading toward the coast. And no, it's not that romantic blue-drenched coast you see in travel ads. This one's rough, rocky, full of sea wind and ships that smell like 1,000 cargoes of dried fish and ambition. The path changes. No more endless dunes, you start seeing shrubs again, the occasional palm frond waving like a single, lazy hand. A river shows up where you'd least expect it, threading through the rocks like someone spilled blue ink. You pass by stone towers built centuries ago, each one gutted by time and sun. Their purpose? Nobody agrees. Watchtowers? Pirate dens? Places to stash stolen spices? Mainstream fact, Before oil transformed Arabia, coastal trade was vital. From Oman to Yemen to the Hijaz, the ancient Arabs were formidable seafarers. They sailed to East Africa, India, and even beyond, bringing back spices, silk, ivory, and sometimes stories that were worth more than anything that could fit in a basket. By mid-morning, the smell of salt invades your nose and refuses to leave. You crest one last hill and see it, the harbor town. It's smaller than you imagined, more tangled, more alive. Buildings are bleached by salt air and streaked with rust, and sails flap on the masts like laundry forgotten in the wind. The docks are chaos, crates of dried sardines, amphorae of wine, sacks of turmeric that paint the air yellow. Sailors shout in 5 languages, 2 of which you've never even heard before. Children dart underfoot, chasing coins, and someone is frying something that smells exactly like regret. You're told to stay out of trouble while the camels rest. So naturally, you head for the part of the docks everyone pointedly avoids. A narrow alley wedged between 2 warehouses, filled with broken crates, suspicious puddles, and a woman selling jewelry made of sea glass and shark teeth. She tells you stories while slipping rings onto your fingers. Of giant serpents in the Indian Ocean. Of a ship that returned from Zanzibar with only its sails, as if the crew had vanished mid-sentence. Of a pearl diver who found a jar sealed in wax, containing a dried-up map written in languages long gone. Fringe tidbit, in the Gulf, divers once believed that certain rare pearls carried dreams. They called them sleep pearls. Supposedly, if you slept with one under your tongue, you'd dream of the place it came from. Problem was, some never woke up again. The sea, one legend whispers, keeps what it loves. You walk farther along the docks and find a ship with a crescent moon carved into its side. The sailors are lean, sun-dark, missing various teeth, and shouting about cinnamon. You recognize the accent, they're from the south. Hadramaut. The edge of the empty quarter. They say they're heading east, Zanzibar, perhaps, or even Sri Lanka if the winds agree. One of them eyes your pouch of saffron and offers you a carved bone flute in trade. It belonged to a jinn singer, he says with a wink. Play it in the desert and see what follows. You don't believe him, obviously. But you trade anyway. Further inland, in a smoky tavern with no door, you meet a spice merchant whose right eye is permanently shut. Too much nutmeg, he says when you ask. He laughs. Then leans close and tells you about the Isle of Fire, where the trees scream when they're cut, and the soil turns silver after the rain. He shows you a piece of bark wrapped in silk, bright red, almost glowing. Clove, he whispers. A single bag can buy a city wall. Historians still argue whether ancient Arab traders truly knew where all their spices came from. Some believe much of the early clove and nutmeg trade came indirectly, through Indian or Indonesian middlemen, and the exact origins of these fire spices remained deliberately obscure to keep prices high. Later, as the sun dips low, you climb a pile of crates and sit overlooking the sea. Ships move in and out like drifting thoughts. A gull lands near you and considers stealing your food, then decides against it. You look out and wonder what it would take to follow the horizon. There's talk among the sailors of monsoon winds coming soon. If they leave too late, they'll be stranded for months. You're told that the monsoon isn't just weather, it's fate. It decides who returns rich and who doesn't return at all. You sleep that night in a loft above a date cellar, your head filled with salt and spice and sails. Someone down below is humming. Someone else is crying. The ocean is louder than any lullaby. And in the middle of the night, you wake up to find the bone flute clutched in your hand, warmer than it should be. Morning doesn't so much arrive as leaking, slow, yellow, and smelling faintly of fish. The sea has a way of making its presence known, even when it pretends to be still. You sit up in the loft, hair full of sawdust, and realize the harbor town hasn't slept. It never sleeps. It just changes tempo. The night traders vanish, the day merchants begin shouting, and the gossip flows like water through cracked stone. Outside, the camel drivers are already gathering, tightening belts and drinking gritty coffee that could probably remove paint. You stretch, blink at the morning chaos, and wander down to the docks one last time. But this time, you don't head toward the merchant ships. You head toward the smaller boats, the ones loaded with nets, bundles of herbs, and rumors. You're looking for pearl divers. Mainstream fact, long before oil reshaped the economy of the Arabian Peninsula, pearls were its true treasure. The Arabian Gulf was one of the world's most significant centers of natural pearl diving, especially between the 6th and 19th centuries. Entire coastal towns thrived on the seasonal migration of divers chasing these watery gems. The divers are lean and quiet, their skin weathered, their fingers webbed with calluses. One nods at your presence but says nothing. Another, older than the sea itself, finally gestures to a bucket. You want to see treasure, he croaks. Start with this. You peer inside. It's full of broken shells, seaweed, and exactly 3 pearls, none of them perfect. This, he says, lifting a misshapen grey one, fed my family for a week once. Because some prince wanted it for a ring. He laughs like the sea laughs, dry, loud, and slightly cruel. They let you tag along in one of the boats, mostly because you bribed them with dates and a single stick of cinnamon. The water is deceptively calm. Below, it's an entire other world. One diver surfaces with a tiny black pearl in his teeth. Another comes up empty, shaking his head. They tell you stories in between breaths, about giant clams that bite back, mermaids that hum warnings before storms, and the house of the sleeping pearls, an underwater cave where only the lucky resurface. Fringe tidbit, in ancient Gulf legend, it was said that every 10th pearl dive attracted the attention of sea spirits called Ulnadaha. If you heard them calling your name underwater and answered, even in your mind, you would forget which way was up. Some divers swore they had met the gaze of one and lived, though they could never sleep soundly again. Back on shore, you stumble upon the Suckal Jawhar, the gemstone market. Not the official one, mind you. That's all taxes and formalities. This one hides behind a curtain of canvas near the fishmonger's alley. It's hot, loud, and full of too much color. You see sapphires the size of fingernails, rubies dark as dried blood, and emeralds cloudy with mystery. But pearls dominate. Some are knotted into silk, others rest in bowls like fruit. You pick up a strange one, flat, tear-shaped, with a pale pink shimmer. A woman with henna-stained fingers leans in and says, "That one's unlucky. Came from a man who vanished at sea. They found it in his stomach, believe it or not." You set it down very, very carefully. Later, as the caravan regroups, you're told of a choice: return inland with the traders, or continue south, along the coast, toward the incense valleys and ancient kingdoms that live half in myth, half in wind. Naturally, you choose the latter. The journey south is neither quick nor quiet. The coastline turns jagged, the heat sharpens, and the camels become grumpy philosophers who grunt their disagreement with every rocky slope. You pass sunken ruins that no one can explain and petroglyphs carved into cliff faces, showing men with fish tails and stars for eyes. Historians still argue whether some of these early coastal petroglyphs reflect lost local beliefs, or whether they were inspired by sailors' encounters with Indian, African, or even Southeast Asian mythologies. You finally arrive at a settlement built entirely of limestone and secrets. Frankincense trees cling to the hills like ghosts. Their resin bleeds amber when cut, and the air smells of holy smoke. You meet a man with hand-stained gold from incense handling. He tells you about Ubar, the lost city of pillars, swallowed by the desert long ago. It traded in fire, he says. Frankincense, myrrh, and smoke that even gods respected. You ask if it was real. He doesn't answer. Just drops a nugget of frankincense into your hand and walks away. At night, you lie awake under the stars, the sea whispering to your left and the desert breathing to your right. You hold the incense in one hand, the bone flute in the other, and realize you're not just traveling anymore. You're being guided. By rumor, by wind, by gold that doesn't glitter. By stories. The desert doesn't wake, it exhales. At dawn, the wind trails over the sand in quiet waves, like it's combing its own hair. The caravan stirs, camels groaning with theatrical despair, traders coughing out the night. And you? You're still clutching that lump of frankincense like it might whisper something useful. The coastline bends away now. You leave behind the salt-slick air and head inland, toward wadis and highland plateaus where clouds cling to mountaintops like lazy cats. The air changes, drier, but sweeter. You taste it before you smell it, spice, sap, and something like ancient wood smoke. The scent of civilization, but very, very old. You've reached the frankincense trail. Mainstream fact: for centuries, especially during the first millennium BCE, the Arabian Peninsula's southern regions, such as modern-day Oman and Yemen, were global epicenters of frankincense and myrrh. These aromatic resins were shipped to Egypt, Mesopotamia, India, and later Rome. They were burned in temples, offered to gods, and even used to embalm kings. The trade routes that moved them were among the richest and most closely guarded in the world. You follow a path once walked by kings and camel boys alike. Narrow canyons give way to tiered terraces where frankincense trees cling to life like stubborn poets. They look like nothing special, gnarled trunks, scrubby leaves, but their bark bleeds gold. The harvesters work at dawn, slicing carefully with obsidian knives, then waiting. The resin weeps. Then it hardens. Only the second and third bleeds are good enough for trade. You ask a boy why. He shrugs. First tears are for the gods. You wander a village built around a single tree said to be thousands of years old. No one touches it. Not even the goats. Fringe tidbit: ancient Arabian traders believed some frankincense trees were sentient, or at least aware. Before cutting one for harvest, elders whispered apologies. Some even left offerings, milk, honey, or a single coin pressed into the roots. One ruined a tree by mocking it, and supposedly died choking on his own shadow. People still avoid his well. You're offered tea made with crushed frankincense. It tastes like drinking history, sharp, bitter, oddly medicinal. But it clears your sinuses in ways no modern pill could dream of. Your guide, an old woman with ankles of steel and jokes sharper than cactus, tells you the road ahead once belonged to the Queen of Sheba. She came this way, the woman says, before she met Solomon. Or maybe after. Depends on which version you like. You ask which is true. She smirks. The one that makes you stay awake thinking about it. Historians still argue whether the Queen of Sheba was a historical figure, a legendary amalgam, or both. Some claim she ruled Saba in southern Arabia, others point toward Ethiopia. Her journey to Jerusalem, famously recounted in the Bible and the Quran, may have echoed ancient trade missions from incense-rich lands. You cross ancient cisterns shaped like cracked moons, and pass walls covered in faded South Arabian script. The language curls like incense smoke. You spot one carving of a man with a staff, standing before a crowned figure seated on a throne of birds. The old woman taps it. That's Sheba, or someone like her. That's her advisor, too. He warned her not to go north. But she went anyway. You would have, too. You probably would have. The next night, the caravan camps in a ruined outpost. It's quiet, too quiet. Even the camels are uneasy. You ask why. The woman gestures toward a broken tower. Bandits used to run this route. Frankincense was more valuable than silver. Men killed over it. Whole tribes rose and fell. You wonder aloud what replaced it. She laughs, eyes glinting in the firelight. Oil, eventually. But even oil can't mask the scent of something holy. You sleep wrapped in a blanket that smells faintly of sap. Somewhere in the dark, someone plays a tune on a three-stringed instrument. It's beautiful, haunting. You dream of the Queen of Sheba and a city made entirely of spice. You wake to the sound of hooves, many of them. It's not your caravan. It's another, larger one, moving in formation like a desert army. And in a way, it is. These aren't traders of incense or dried apricots. These are horsemen of the highlands, and they don't walk, they ride. The camel beside you snorts as if offended. You sympathize. Camels plod, horses glide. And in pre-oil Arabia, that difference meant everything. They call them the tribes of the north, from the rocky stretches of Najd to the wide plains that unfurl beneath the stars. These horsemen live with the sky above and the wind at their back, moving from well to well, border to border, like they own the desert. Maybe they do. No one argues with a man carrying a sword shaped like a lightning bolt. Mainstream fact: before the modern states of the Middle East were formed, Arabia was largely divided among tribal confederations. These tribes, such as the Ghatafan, Banu Tamim, or Banu Hanifa, were fiercely independent and formed intricate alliances, rivalries, and honor systems. Tribal identity shaped everything: your dialect, your enemies, your place in a wedding procession. You're invited to ride with one such tribe, for a day, they say. Just to see. Your camel makes a rude sound. The saddle is high, the stirrups terrifyingly far apart, and the horse. The horse looks like it's already judged you. It's not a luxurious ride. More like wrestling a cloud full of bees. But eventually, you get the rhythm, and suddenly, you're flying. The desert stretches beneath you like a parchment, and every hoofbeat is a heartbeat of history. The chief, an older man with a beard like storm clouds, tells you that their tribe can trace its lineage back 40 generations. You ask how they remember. We don't remember, he says. We recite. That night, you gather by the fire. The youngest boys chant their ancestry in sing-song Arabic, names tumbling down like dominoes. I am the son of Saleh, son of Hamad, son of Jubayah, and on it goes, until even the stars get bored. Fringe tidbit: in some tribes, oral genealogies were tested by other clans. If a boy couldn't recite his lineage back at least 10 generations without error, his honor, and that of his whole family, might be questioned. Forget a name, and you might as well forget dinner. Later, a man plays the rabab, a one-stringed fiddle made from goatskin and wood. Its voice is thin but rich, like a whisper with opinions. He sings of a lost stallion, a drowned oasis, a woman who ran faster than the moon. No one claps. Clapping is too crude. Instead, they nod slowly, eyes closed. You ask if the stories are real. They're true, someone replies, just not always factual. Historians still argue whether the oldest Arabian tribal structures predate Islam or were formalized only afterward. Some records suggest ancient tribal codes existed long before the 7th century, rooted in unwritten customs. Others think Islamic law simply layered itself over pre-existing ethics like a mosaic on a ruin. You ride again the next day, passing rock carvings in the cliffs, horses, men with shields, camels taller than logic. These petroglyphs, you're told, are older than most empires. One shows a rider holding a bow in one hand and, oddly, a flower in the other. No one's sure why. The chief shrugs. He was probably in love. We all go stupid then. You ask what happens if two tribes want the same water well. The chief raises an eyebrow. Do you want the dramatic answer, or the real one? You say both. He laughs. The dramatic answer is war. The real answer is tea, shouting, sulking, and maybe a cousin's marriage to smooth things over. You nod. That tracks. The sun drops fast in the desert. It doesn't set so much as vanish. In the purple hour before dark, you watch riders silhouetted on distant dunes, just like they've always been. No highways. No oil rigs. No borders. Just wind, blood, and the long memory of horses. You're offered a cup of kawa, spiced coffee, in a tiny porcelain cup. You sip, and it tastes like roasted thyme. Someone leans in and mutters, "This isn't the strong stuff." The strong stuff they say for weddings and war. You look down at your trembling hands and think, maybe this is war. You fall asleep under open sky again. No tents tonight, only blankets and stars. The fire crackles low, and a man hums an old tune about a horse that never dies but only forgets it's alive. And you? You dream of riding forever, chasing a shadow you're not sure you saw, toward a dawn that smells like cardamom and dust. When morning comes, it comes with sand in your teeth and a scorpion under your boot. You don't scream. That would be embarrassing. But your heart does a polite cartwheel, and a nearby child giggles. Welcome to the market town. Unlike the last dusty trail and the endless dunes, this place buzzes, quietly, but with purpose. A dozen stone huts, shaded by date palms. The scent of dried fish. The distant clang of a metalworker's hammer. A pre-oil Arabian settlement, small but stubborn, surviving off trade, rainwater, and really intense arguments over camel pricing. You step into the heart of the village, where the souk begins, not with a gate or a grand sign, but with a slightly offended goat chewing on someone's cloak. Mainstream fact, long before oil wealth, Arabian towns like Alula, Diriyah, and Shabam thrived as trade hubs, way stations, and gathering places. These settlements were often built near oases or crossroads, where caravans could rest, merchants could sell, and local politics could bubble politely, or not so politely, beneath the surface. A man offers you dried limes. A boy sells water in a clay pot the size of his torso. A woman hawks coal made from ground minerals, black as the inside of a cave, sharp enough to make your eyes look dangerously mysterious. And of course, there's dates. Mountains of them. You're handed one, then another. They're sticky, sweet, and taste like someone condensed the sun into fruit. The mosque here isn't tall or showy, just a square building with mud brick walls and a wooden beam where birds argue all day. A man calls the prayer with a voice that cracks on the high notes but still stirs something in your ribs. You're invited inside. No pressure, they say. Just sit. Watch. So you do. The floor is cool. The quiet is deep. You wonder how long this ritual has echoed in this very spot, centuries, probably. Generations worn into the stone, every prayer smoothing the floor like water smoothing rock. Outside, the market keeps ticking. Two men argue loudly over the price of goat cheese, which you're now convinced is a national pastime. A woman adjusts her veil and rolls her eyes as she passes. The drama is universal. Even here. Fringe tidbit, in some Arabian villages, instead of coins, people traded salt blocks, dried camel meat, or even poetic verses. If your words were good enough, you could settle a debt with a poem. Good luck trying that at a modern bank. You step into a weaver's hut. It smells like sun-warmed wool and ambition. A girl, maybe 12, shows you how she spins goat hair into thread, then dyes it with indigo and pomegranate skins. She's making a bag, and it's already better than anything you could make with your 10 grown-up fingers. She tells you the pattern will tell a story about her family's herd, a sandstorm they survived, and the one-eyed camel who refused to die. You blink. That's oddly specific. True story, she says. Historians still argue whether villages like these developed organically around trade routes or were designed with intentional clustering for defense, social cohesion, or religious unity. Some think the oldest Arabian towns were temporary and seasonal, only becoming permanent when wells or politics demanded it. You spot a watchtower, nothing fancy, just stacked stone and a ladder that would give a modern safety inspector nightmares. But from the top, you see the pattern, homes clustered like pebbles, the mosque at the heart, the souk stretching like a spine. Beyond that, the endless dunes. A few camels moving like ships on the horizon. Someone hands you a cup of nabis, an old Arabian fermented drink made from soaked dates or raisins. It's fizzy, sweet, and suspiciously tasty. You're told it used to be much stronger, before certain scholars ruined everyone's fun. In the shade of a tamarisk tree, an elder tells you about the Jahiliyyah, the time before Islam, when tribes ruled all, poetry was law, and vengeance was currency. He says it like a bedtime story, not a warning. Like it's something remembered, not regretted. You ask about visitors. Foreigners. Outsiders. He shrugs. Some came. Some stayed. Most left. The desert doesn't keep everyone. A group of children run by, chasing a tire. One trips. They all laugh. Nothing is broken except pride, which is very fixable at that age. You ask what people dream of here. He says, rain. Always rain. And maybe a faster donkey. That night, you sleep on a rooftop under stars that feel too close. The village fades to whispers, the sound of clay pots cooling, goats snoring, wind nudging wooden shutters. You feel like you're floating in a time bubble, one made of prayer calls, bartered onions, and the smell of baked flatbread. No cars. No towers. No oil. Just community, chaos, and a culture that clings to its stories like heirlooms made of smoke. You dream of weaving your own poem into fabric. Of trading a verse for a meal. Of telling a stranger your story, and them replying, yes. That will do nicely. The rooster wakes you up by accident. He's meant to crow at the sun, not your face. But here we are. You sit up on the rooftop where you slept, stretch like you're about to do something athletic, you're not, and take in the town as it wakes. Smoke threads lazily from ovens. Someone is grinding coffee. A baby is already mad about something. Today, you're leaving the market village, but not for another settlement. You're going to follow the caravans. Not a tour group. Not a polite convoy. A full-blown, dust-kicking, camel-snorting desert freight train of the pre-oil world. You join at the edge of town, where the caravan is assembling. There are 40 camels, some of them clearly over it, loaded with everything from salt to silk. The lead driver, whose beard is at least 3 decisions ahead of yours, gives you a squint and a shrug. That's a yes, apparently. Mainstream fact: Arabian caravans were the lifeblood of trade long before the region struck oil. Routes like the Incense Road ran for hundreds of miles, connecting the Arabian interior with Yemen, the Levant, Egypt, and Persia. Goods included frankincense, myrrh, spices, pearls, and handmade textiles. Camels, of course, were the chosen vehicles, ships of the desert, except they spit. A boy ties your satchel with a knot that you absolutely cannot undo. A woman adjusts your head wrap so it actually works. You try to say thank you. They nod as if they're not sure you'll survive the day. The caravan sets off. Slowly. It's not dramatic. There's no trumpet blast. Just the crunch of sand, the creak of rope, the soft thud of hooves. For hours, the rhythm is hypnotic, swaying camel backs, wind like dry whispers, and the distant smell of cloves leaking from a sack. You pass ruins, low walls of stone, maybe Roman, maybe older. Someone says a queen lived there once. Someone else says it was a bandit camp. Both agree it's haunted. You keep walking. You trade stories. A man from the Hadramaut region says his cousin married a jinn. Another insists he once sold ostrich feathers to a pharaoh's descendant. No one believes him, but it's a good story. Fringe tidbit: some caravans employed professional story guides, people whose job was to entertain the group with poetry, jokes, or riddles during long night rests. If they were really good, they'd get paid in honey or a promise of marriage to someone's cousin. Sometimes both. You help unload at a camp just before nightfall. Tents blossom like petals in the wind. The fire crackles. Someone roasts a desert hare. Someone else brews kahwa, a bitter coffee with cardamom so strong it practically narrates its own origin story. Camels groan like retired philosophers. You're handed a bowl. No one says what's in it. It's warm, savory, and contains at least one unexpected raisin. You pretend you know what you're doing. Later, under a canopy of stars so dense it looks pixelated, the caravan men recite poetry. Not fluffy stuff. Intense verses about pride, betrayal, longing, and goats. You're told poetry is more than art here, it's social currency, political weapon, and emotional outlet all in one. There are poems that started wars, and some that ended them. Historians still argue whether these caravan traditions were homegrown or absorbed from ancient neighbors like the Nabateans or Sabaeans. The blending of rituals, architecture, and vocabulary suggests deep, cross-cultural entanglement. But then again, when you share a desert and a trade route, you tend to swap more than just goods. Someone points to a bright red star overhead. That's the warrior, he says. He protects us from what follows us. You ask what follows you. He just laughs and goes to sleep. You lie there, warm from firelight and camel breath. You remember the trade goods you saw earlier, cloves from Zanzibar, silk from India, glass beads from Byzantium. Somehow, all of it has passed through this barren silence. In the morning, you'll move again. Always forward. Always slower than expected. That's the rule of the road. But for now, you drift. You dream of long lines of camels snaking across the earth like the veins of an old map. Of gold coins sewn into a saddle. Of perfume strong enough to outlast a week in the desert. You dream of being the poet who keeps the caravan walking, story by story, all the way to the sea. The sea. You smell it before you hear it. Not the clean, breezy sort you daydream about. No. This one arrives thick with brine and the faint aroma of dead fish that have made questionable life choices. But it's the sea nonetheless, and after weeks of dust and sunstroke-level humidity, it's as close to magic as anything gets in this century. Your feet crunch onto the docks of Jeddah. Not yet a modern port city, but already a bustling mess of sails, crates, and arguments in at least 6 languages. The Red Sea glitters like a hot silver pan. You almost forget you're still technically in the desert. You trail the caravan master through the crowd. This isn't a farewell, it's a transfer. Goods change hands. Camels are traded for donkeys. Spices are wrapped tighter. Scrolls are tucked into waterproof tubes made from stitched goat bladders. Very appetizing. Mainstream fact, Jeddah, long before oil wealth transformed it into a gateway to Mecca for millions of pilgrims, was a crucial maritime trade hub. Positioned on the Red Sea, it connected Arabian inland routes with African and Indian Ocean merchants. From here, everything from pearls to pepper moved across ancient shipping lanes to Egypt, India, and even China. You're invited aboard a dhow, an elegant but questionably stable wooden ship powered by lateen sails. You try not to ask where the life vests are. There aren't any. You settle into a corner with a bowl of dates and the low hum of men chanting sea prayers in Arabic and Swahili. The coast disappears quickly. The sea doesn't do slow goodbyes. 3 days in, you've memorized the creak of timber and the splash of flying fish. The sky is a dome of heat. You spot dolphins, maybe, or sea spirits, if the ship's cook is to be believed. He insists they follow lucky vessels. He also insists his stew is good. One of these things is provably false. Fringe tidbit, pre-oil Arabian sailors sometimes believed in maritime jinn, spirit beings of salt and wave that could twist wind and sink ships if not appeased. Some dhows sailed with small carved talismans hidden near the rudder to keep these creatures entertained. A bored jinn, apparently, was a dangerous jinn. At night, the stars take over. You lie on deck, too tired to swat at the buzzing insects. You overhear sailors reciting sea poems, odes to long-lost ports, women who waited, or didn't, and storms that whispered in 1,000 tongues. There's one about a pearl diver who swam so deep, he emerged in another world. You quietly hope not to test that theory. In the distance, the coast of East Africa emerges. Mombasa, Zanzibar, Lamu. You're not here long, but the smell of clove trees clings to everything, your clothes, your memory, your curiosity. You watch deals unfold in Swahili and Arabic, Persian, and Gujarati. You see Indian textiles exchanged for Arabian frankincense, gold bracelets weighed beside heaps of dried fish, and a Persian merchant in velvet shoes trying, and failing, to ride a donkey. You're told this exact moment of shouting, counting, and haggling, is older than most empires. Historians still argue whether the Red Sea maritime routes were dominated by Arab merchants or if they were always a multinational soup of sailors, Sabaeans, Africans, Persians, and even distant Malay traders. The truth, as always, is probably yes. You learn to help unload. Not well, but with enthusiasm. You make friends with a pearl diver who claims to have been bitten by a shark and lived. He shows you the scar. You quietly think it looks like a goat nibble, but you keep that to yourself. Everywhere you look is life, loud, tangled, layered. There is no oil here. No pumping stations. No pipelines. And yet, somehow, people are rich, in trade, in culture, in rhythm. These harbors are pulsing hearts of pre-oil Arabia. You visit a coral stone mosque with door carvings so intricate they feel like wood lace. You eat grilled fish so fresh it still seems insulted. You try something called tamarind water and then try to pretend it isn't your new obsession. You hear rumors of Chinese ships docking once every few decades. Of African kings sending gold up the coast to trade for horses. Of people who claim they've seen land beyond the storm belt, where no map dares go. You believe all of it. Or at least, you want to. As the ship prepares to leave for its return journey, you stand on the dock, unsure if you're homesick or just mildly sunburned. Someone offers you a woven pouch filled with sea salt, clove buds, and dried ginger. Smells like money, they joke. You take it. It also smells like memory. Back aboard the dhow, you realize the sails are patched with at least 3 different languages worth of cloth. And yet they all catch the same wind. You wake up to sand. Not dunes this time, just the itchy, gritty kind that settled between your teeth, your clothes, and every crevice of your dignity after a week back on land. The dhow dropped you somewhere in the southern Arabian coast, and now your shoes crunch across what used to be a seabed millions of years ago, now part of the Hadramaut Plateau. The landscape rolls gently, not with the violence of towering dunes but with the suggestion of forgotten time. The cliffs are bleached and wind-scrubbed. The air has that strange stillness of places where not much has changed in 1,000 years. You're heading inland now, following the route of the ancient frankincense caravans. The journey isn't glamorous. Your travel companions include one very judgmental goat, 2 sleepy donkeys, and a boy no older than 12 who speaks in riddles and sells stones that definitely glowed once. Mainstream fact: before oil made it wealthy, Arabia's south, particularly modern-day Oman and Yemen, thrived on the trade of frankincense and myrrh, aromatic tree resins harvested from boswellia and commiphora trees. These substances were once worth more than gold and used in religious ceremonies, embalming, and some very questionable ancient medicine. You learn to identify the trees. Scrubby things with papery bark and small green leaves, clinging to crags where no tree ought to grow. The locals slice the bark, letting the milky sap ooze and harden into golden teardrops. Then they gather it like treasure, storing it in jars lined with crushed charcoal. some traders burn a pinch at every new camp. You watch the smoke curl in lazy spirals, smelling sweet, spicy, and faintly like churches you've never been inside. You follow the incense road, a thread stretching north through the desert toward Petra, Palmyra, and eventually Mediterranean ports where Roman senators once paid obscene amounts of money just to smell exotic. Fringe tidbit: some caravans believed that frankincense trees wouldn't grow unless certain sacred words were sung during the harvest. It's said that if you cut the bark in silence, the sap turns black, and the tree eventually curses your journey. You hum politely, just in case. Every few miles, you pass abandoned outposts, wind-bitten towers where once wealthy traders drank bitter coffee and negotiated over camel prices. You hear stories of towns that bloomed overnight on the back of incense profits, and died just as fast when a sea route stole their business. You sleep under stars so clear they look carved. You count shooting stars until you forget how numbers work. You wake up covered in sand, again, and pretend it's exfoliating. At one stop, you meet a man claiming to be the last direct descendant of the Queen of Sheba's incense hunters. He gives you a trinket carved from the root of an old frankincense tree and insists it brings good luck. It smells like smoke and rain. Historians still argue whether the Queen of Sheba was a real figure, a composite of multiple rulers, or a poetic metaphor for ancient trade diplomacy. What's certain is that the incense trade made the southern Arabian kingdoms, like Saba and Hadramaut, astonishingly powerful. For a little while, at least. You reach the ruins of Ubar, called the Atlantis of the Sands by romantics and Lost Kingdom chasers. Crumbling stone arches. An ancient well. A collapsed sinkhole that swallows camels if you step too close. You sit in the silence of the ruins and try to picture the past. People in robes dyed with indigo. Incense smoke curling from every doorway. Foreign visitors laying gold and silk at the feet of traders. The whisper of camels. The clink of scales. The rising chant of evening prayer. Gone now. All of it. Buried under dust and myth. You wonder how many fortunes were made here. How many lives traded in the name of scent. How many stories evaporated like smoke over the centuries, leaving only the faintest trace behind. That night, you camp near a wadi, where reeds still grow and frogs croak like they haven't heard of climate change. You sip water that tastes of limestone and rest your head on a woven thulbag. The stars are back again. You swear they've shifted. You realize something. Before oil, before pipelines and politics, the land still found ways to hold value, to weave desire into bark and scent and story. To tempt travelers like you to keep walking. To keep following roads carved by feet long vanished. Somewhere out there, incense still burns. And someone, even now, might be following its smoke. You blink into the early morning haze, another sleepy sunrise painted in bronze and peach, stretching over the stony plains. Your boots are ruined, your skin smells like sun-warmed dust and old leather, and your memories feel stitched together with campfire smoke. You're deep into the Hijaz now, the northwestern cradle of Arabia, trailing the thin, meandering veins of old pilgrimage routes, paths older than Islam, older than most empires, and somehow still alive in the worn grooves of the desert. Here, the Nabateans once carved cities from stone, hoarded water in desert cisterns, and taxed every traveler foolish enough to pass through without knowing how expensive nothing can get. You shuffle toward the carved tombs of Al-Hijr, the sister city of Petra. Towering facades hewn into rose-red cliffs. Sandstone columns. Greek-inspired arches. But the silence here hums with the energy of a people who hid their genius behind secrecy and trade. Mainstream fact: the Nabateans were master traders and hydraulic engineers who controlled much of the incense and spice trade routes across Arabia. Their capital, Petra, was once the beating heart of desert commerce, and their inscriptions hint at a sophisticated culture blending Arab roots with Hellenistic flair. You're led by a local guide who, of course, swears he's descended from Nabatean royalty. His family tree includes at least 2 smugglers, 1 well poisoner, and a woman who supposedly charged Roman diplomats per camel blink. The tombs stare at you. They are decorated but empty. Looted long ago. Or never filled. Maybe just a flex, monuments to wealth so great it didn't need bodies to prove it. Fringe tidbit: some locals say the Nabateans vanished because they learned to speak with the jinn, spirits made of smokeless fire. That the last of them walked into the cliffs and never came back, leaving only stone facades and oddly well-drained courtyards behind. You sit in one of those courtyards, your back pressed against warm rock, and listen for voices in the wind. Nothing, just the scrape of shifting sand and the flutter of a lone desert sparrow who probably judges your hydration levels. The guide pours you cardamom coffee. It tastes like earth and ashes and memory. You drink slowly, because there's not much else to do in a place where time itself seems to drip instead of tick. From here, the road forks. One trail leads west toward the Red Sea ports where frankincense and spices sail to Egypt, Rome, and later, to Venetian merchants with more velvet than sense. The other leads inland, east, toward deep Arabian oases that once pulsed with life, markets, stories, and ambition long before oil turned heads. You choose the east. You journey toward Al-Asa, one of the world's oldest continuously inhabited oases. Palm groves stretch like emerald blankets across the desert's edge, fed by artesian wells that somehow haven't run dry in 5,000 years. You bathe your hands in the cool spring water and stare up at date palms so tall they seem impossible. Children swing from ropes tied to their trunks. The air smells like ripened fruit and wet stone. You eat a date so sweet it rewires your brain. You meet farmers whose families have tended the same plots since the dawn of language. Some of them speak Arabic the old way, slow, curled, and thick with poetry. Others speak in gestures or jokes. They invite you into mud brick homes, press more food into your hands than you can hold, and laugh when you ask if the past is still alive. Of course it is, one woman says. You're standing in it. Historians still argue whether Al-Asa was first settled by migrating Sumerians, early Arab tribes, or mysterious sea traders from even further east. What's clear is that the oasis once functioned as a center of date commerce, camel breeding, and pre-Islamic culture, long before any black gold bubbled up from beneath. Here, wealth came not from minerals, but from water. And water, water was magic. You pass ancient kanat tunnels, irrigation systems that snake underground for miles, feeding distant orchards. You watch a man clean one with a bucket and a pulley, humming a tune you think you've heard before in a dream. That night, in a small guest house, you flip through a poetry book left on the table. Handwritten. Spines cracked. Verses about stars, horses, loss, and oasis light. You don't understand every word, but the rhythm soothes you. You fall asleep mid-line, your head against a woven cushion. And dream of camels. Lots of camels. You dream of entire economies balanced on the back of one grumpy, drooling animal who will absolutely spit in your eye if you insult its load-bearing capacity. But they carried everything: resins, spices, jewels, salt, stories, and entire cultures stitched into the saddlebags of forgotten caravans. You wake up to the sound of them braying in the distance. Your story isn't over. The oil hasn't come yet. And something is waiting for you in the deeper sands. But first, maybe just one more date. You wake with your mouth sticky from dried dates and your nose filled with the soft, musty perfume of woven palm mats. Outside, the oasis hums like a living creature, breezes rustle through the date palms, doves call lazily from rooftops, and someone is already boiling cardamom-scented water over a fire that crackles with the sound of morning. You rise slowly, not because you're tired, though you are, but because in this place, time doesn't rush. Everything is measured in breaths, in shade, in cups poured and shared. You move like the people here, with purpose, but without urgency. A young man with bright eyes and a crooked grin offers to show you something. His name is Saleh, and he walks like someone who's always halfway through a poem. He leads you out of the palm groves and toward a low ridge of sunburned earth, and beyond that, the windswept edges of the Rub al-Khali, the empty quarter. Mainstream fact: the Rub al-Khali is the largest uninterrupted sand desert on Earth, covering parts of Saudi Arabia, Oman, the UAE, and Yemen. It's a place of myth and memory, so dry that even bones fade to dust. Historically, very few dared to cross it, and even fewer returned with tales. Saleh tells you those tales anyway. There were traders, once, bold and foolish. Dreamers with sun-scorched hopes. They chased the legend of Ubar, the Atlantis of the sands, a city whispered about in old Quranic verses and Bedouin songs. A city said to have defied the will of the heavens and been swallowed by the earth. Fringe tidbit: in the 1990s, satellite imaging revealed what might be ancient caravan routes converging on a ruined site deep in the desert. Archaeologists found collapsed limestone caverns and hints of long-lost walls. Was it Ubar? No one agrees. But it stirred something ancient, something that still sleeps beneath the dunes. You stare at the edge of that vast, hot nothingness. The sand glows like bronze silk. The horizon wavers. The air sings. Do you want to see the stars the way our ancestors did? Saleh asks, and by afternoon you're trekking into the wilderness with 3 camels, 2 canteens, and 1 seriously questionable hat. That night, you lie back on the sand, your tent flapping idly nearby, untouched by even the smallest breeze. The sky above is an ocean turned upside down. Stars blink so hard they seem to shout. The Milky Way spills across the heavens like powdered silver. Saleh points at constellations, the dromedary, the hunter, the great scorpion. His great-grandfather used to guide caravans by these stars, memorizing every dune, every seasonal spring, every story etched into the topography of survival. You feel tiny and full and weirdly itchy because sand has found a way into your shirt, your shoes, your ears, and probably your soul. You sip water that tastes like warm metal. Saleh passes you a bit of flatbread and cheese wrapped in linen. It's the best meal you've had in weeks. Hunger always adds seasoning. The next morning, you visit a ruined well, just a few hours from where Ubar might have been. It's surrounded by collapsed stones, bits of worked wood, and old camel bones so dry they crackle underfoot. No sign of gold. No buried city. No divine retribution carved into the sky. Just silence. And maybe that's the point. Because before oil, the desert itself was the treasure. It guarded secrets, yes, but also tested everyone who sought them. Only those who knew how to listen, to wait, to survive without conquest, were welcome. You feel your own thirst now, not for water, but for meaning. These people didn't build cathedrals or marble palaces. They built relationships with the stars, maps from memory, markets from firelight, and homes from mud and resilience. Historians still argue whether Ubar truly existed, or whether it's a symbolic stand-in for dozens of smaller settlements lost to time and sand. But one thing is certain, the stories of those who crossed the Rub al-Khali, on camelback, guided by starlight and sheer nerve, are real enough to shape how we remember this land. You and Saleh turn back. The return is slower. You've picked up a desert gait, shoulders relaxed, steps wide, mind floating just above your thoughts. There's an art to traveling in places where emptiness teaches everything. Back in the oasis, the townspeople welcome you like a relative who's just survived a test. One elderly woman claps your shoulder and mutters something approving in a dialect you don't understand but absolutely feel in your bones. You sleep that night with sand still in your hair. And for the first time, you dream not of treasure or cities of gold, but of wind. Of waiting. Of wisdom buried not beneath the earth, but within it. By now, you've learned how to sit cross-legged without your legs falling asleep, how to sip boiling tea without wincing, and how to listen, not just hear, but truly listen, to stories that don't end where you expect them to. This morning, you sit beneath a crumbling arch of sandstone while an old man named Marwan sharpens a pen made of reed. He's not writing a letter. He's copying a poem. A very old one. You don't know the words, yet, but the rhythm of his recitation makes you feel like you should. The verses seem to float in the air like desert dust, shimmering and slow. He pauses only to dip the nib in ink again, ink made of soot and pomegranate rind, boiled down into something that smells faintly like smoke and memory. You've arrived in a place that doesn't appear on maps, a school of sorts, but older than any modern university. One long room, some benches, an open ceiling, and minds sharper than the sun. Mainstream fact, before oil, many Arab regions, especially in the Hijaz and Levant, were hubs of scholarship. Cities like Mecca, Medina, Damascus, and Baghdad were known not just for trade, but for producing thinkers, poets, astronomers, doctors, and jurists who preserved and advanced human knowledge. Children in this small town are still taught under stars, on rugs, with voices instead of screens. A young girl reads aloud from a worn leather-bound book. Her cadence is steady. You don't understand the script, but the confidence in her voice makes it feel like you should. Later, Marwan shows you something tucked inside a reed basket, a sheaf of fragile papers, covered in looping Arabic calligraphy. You think it's more poetry, maybe love letters. But no, it's a star chart. An ancient one. Fringe tidbit: many early Arab scholars used astrolabes and stellar maps not just for navigation, but for religious purposes, timing prayers, finding Mecca, understanding celestial events. Some charts weren't purely scientific or religious, they were also symbolic, turning stars into metaphors for the human soul. Marwan traces the stars with his finger. He says, "These lights above? They tell us when to plant, when to travel, when to rest. They've never lied. But men lie all the time." You nod. Hard to argue with astronomy. Someone hands you a clay bowl of sweet, fermented milk, a taste both weird and wonderful, like yogurt that got into a philosophical argument with cheese and won. You sip. The air smells of ink and goat and sun-warmed linen. In the afternoon, a procession winds through the village. You ask if it's a festival. They laugh. "No," says Marwan, "a wedding." But it's more than that. It's also a legal ceremony, a poetry contest, and apparently a spice trading opportunity, because halfway through the singing, someone opens a bundle of dried saffron and suddenly you're helping haggle over its price. Historians still argue whether pre-oil Arabian societies should be viewed as isolated and primitive, or as complex networks of spiritual, legal, and cultural sophistication, ones the West simply didn't recognize until they were bathed in petroleum wealth. What's becoming clear, though, is that their strength came from connection, not from conquest. As twilight deepens, the wedding guests gather for food. The dishes are modest: rice, dates, roasted lamb, lentils, but the flavors are royal. People eat with their hands, passing bowls, laughing without filters. There are no forks, but there is abundance. You've eaten in castles, but this meal feels more human. A boy leans over and offers you a palm leaf fan shaped like a fish. "You're sweating," he says, not unkindly. You use it and thank him. He grins. "You owe me a story." He's not joking. Because here, stories aren't just entertainment, they're currency. A place where gold was scarce, but metaphor was plentiful. You owe him a tale, and in return, he might give you one that's been passed down for generations. Oral storytelling wasn't a pastime here, it was an archive. So you talk. You tell him about a faraway land where rain falls in sideways sheets, where green eats the sky, where people ride machines and rarely look up. His eyebrows rise. He calls over his friends. You find yourself weaving, embellishing, performing. It feels natural. The sun is gone now, and someone lights a small brass lantern filled with oil. Ironic, you think, since oil will one day rewrite everything for this world. But tonight, it burns gently, casting shadows on faces that look impossibly ancient and entirely modern at the same time. The boy leans in close and says, "You do well here. You talk like a mountain." You smile, not understanding, but accepting it as a compliment. Later, lying on a straw mat inside a mud brick guest house, you stare at the palm frond ceiling and think about what you learned, that before oil, before wealth and borders and the ticking clocks of global economy, the Arab world had its own wealth. Not measured in coins, but in memory, meaning, and maps made of stars. You drift off to sleep with the scent of old paper and rosewater lingering around you. When you wake, the desert is whispering again. But this time, it's not wind over sand, it's metal against stone, soft and steady, like someone sharpening the future in secret. You sit up, blink against the gold of morning, and follow the sound until you reach an open pit carved into the earth. Not a mine, a forge. Before oil, before highways, before glass towers tried to scrape the sky, Arab craftsmen worked in fire and shadow to create things that endured longer than empires. And this forge, tucked into a rocky outcrop, is the heart of the village. There's no sign, no gate, no ad campaign, but the blacksmith inside is a legend. He's broad in the shoulders, sure. But it's his hands you notice, calloused, burned, impossibly precise. He nods to you, barely glancing up from the blade he's filing. You catch a glimpse of it, curved, lean, glinting like a smile you don't fully trust. A scimitar. Mainstream historians often describe the Arabian Peninsula as a passive region, waiting for outsiders to draw its borders, define its destiny. But tools like this say otherwise. This land was not waiting. It was surviving. Mainstream fact, long before oil, Arab metallurgy and craftsmanship were renowned. Damascus steel, coral inlay, mother-of-pearl mosaics, and curved blades became known across continents, not just as weapons, but as art. Swords weren't just made to fight, they were heirlooms, stories, identities. Fringe tidbit? The blacksmith here swears this blade sings when it cuts through air. He demonstrates, and you're halfway convinced he's right. The sound is musical. Not haunting. More like something remembered. Children gather at the edge of the forge, their faces streaked with soot, watching like it's a sacred ritual. One offers you a roasted chickpea. Another hands you a half-carved wooden toy camel. No one's selling anything, they're just sharing. That's the odd thing, isn't it? In a land the modern world would later label poor before oil, there is a sense of plenty. Plenty of heat. Plenty of laughter. Plenty of skill. People don't hoard, they hand down. The blacksmith finishes the blade, dips it into oil to temper it, and hangs it on a wooden rack beside half a dozen others, each one different, each one with its own etched story. The one he just made? That's for a wedding. A ceremonial gift. It won't spill blood. It'll hang on a wall beside palm leaf fans and poetry scrolls and a small, hand-carved lute. Historians still argue whether pre-oil Arabian tribes lived in constant conflict, as many colonial texts claimed, or whether they had more nuanced systems of mediation, gift exchange, and ritual that avoided unnecessary bloodshed. Recent archaeology is forcing a rethink. The sun is higher now, and the forge's heat blends with the day's heat until you're sweating in places you didn't know could sweat. You step away to find a bit of shade, and walk straight into a man selling salt. Yes, salt. He's seated beside what looks like a basket full of broken white rocks, but these aren't rocks. They're salt chunks. From inland beds, where the water vanished but the minerals stayed. Better than gold, he says. You can't eat gold. And he's not wrong. Long before oil, the Arabian economy was built not on glittering metals but on what the body actually needs: salt, dates, water, and eventually, when roots opened, spices. Trade was practical first, glamorous second. You watch him trade a chunk of salt for a painted cup, and that cup for a length of dyed cotton. No money changes hands. Just need. Just fairness. Just rhythm. Behind him, a boy hammers a brass plate into a bowl, his rhythm syncing with the blacksmith's, metal echoing across sand like heartbeat music. You're not sure what time it is, and no one around you seems to care. No clocks tick. No phones buzz. A small girl passes carrying a bundle of sticks taller than she is. You offer to help. She laughs and tells you to keep your arms for storytelling instead. You're starting to get a reputation. Later, sitting on a woven rug with sweet mint tea and a half-circle of villagers, someone hands you an old, battered object, a copper astrolabe. Delicate, complex, and completely unintelligible. But it turns in your hands, quietly, with purpose. One man leans over. To measure the stars, he says. To find your way. But I'm not lost, you reply. He grins. Everyone says that before the sand shifts. You spend the evening learning how to read the stars again. Not with an app. Not on a screen. Just with your neck craned, a finger tracing invisible arcs, and a mind wide open. The village around you glows soft amber with firelight and oil lamps. No diesel. No gas flares. Just the warmth of a world that knew how to make its own heat. The blacksmith passes by again, this time in a clean tunic, his hands no longer coated in soot but still steady. He hands you something, a small curved blade with a handle wrapped in leather. Not sharp. Just ornamental. For the stories, he says. You nod. For the stars. Then, as the night stretches long, you wrap yourself in a blanket that smells faintly of cinnamon and smoke, and you drift off under a sky so full of stars you forget what ceilings are. You dream of stories forged in fire and traded for salt. Of blades that sing, and bowls that remember the rhythm of hammers. Of a life before oil, hotter, harsher, but never hollow. You stir from sleep to the sound of water. Real water, not wind, not sand shivering across stone, but water trickling, flowing, murmuring like it has secrets to tell. That's strange, here. In this wide, bone-dry landscape, the idea of water feels almost magical. But here you are, standing on the edge of an oasis just as the sun spills over the dunes. This place is so green it nearly hurts your eyes. Palm trees cluster like old friends around a spring-fed pool. Birds you can't name swoop low across the surface. A few goats shuffle past, grumbling as they go. A woman nearby is washing dates in a woven sieve, and a child beside her is trying to catch a frog with a fig leaf. You sit in the shade of a fig tree and let the quiet soak in. Because today is about survival, the everyday kind. Not the drama of war or conquest. Just people figuring out how to stay alive without losing their souls. You hear a soft chant in the distance, rhythmic and low, and follow it to a group of women gathering herbs in the rocky outcrops. One of them, maybe the leader, or maybe just the one with the loudest laugh, beckons you over and shows you a handful of crushed thyme. This one keeps the stomach quiet, she says, placing it in a pouch. Mainstream historians often gloss over this part, the ecogenius of pre-oil Arab life. Desert survival wasn't luck, it was science. It was generations of observation, memorized routes, and medicine that worked because it had to. Herbal cures, camel milk poultices, and salt skin tonics passed down like bedtime stories. You help gather for a bit, moving slowly, watching how they harvest only every third plant, never stripping the land, never taking more than they need. It's a lifestyle built on patience and precision, not plunder. Quirky tidbit? The desert people used to press coal eyeliner from burned date pits, not just for style, though yes, it looks fierce, but to reduce the sun's glare. Think desert Ray-Bans, but way more sustainable. When midday heat presses down like a thick blanket, everyone disappears into canvas tents or stone homes, and the oasis becomes still again. You nap beneath the fig tree and wake to the scent of roasting barley and cinnamon. There's a communal pot simmering over a fire, and a circle forming around it for the midday meal. No utensils. Just flatbread, fingers, and a lot of laughter. A grizzled man with sun-leathered skin tells a story about a caravan that once passed through here carrying glass beads from Venice. Another chimes in with tales of ostrich egg trading. Someone else casually mentions a time when a Roman general got lost nearby and begged water from a shepherd, and then had the nerve to offer coins in thanks. Coins, someone scoffs. You can't plant coins. You can't drink them. Historians still argue whether coins ever had much day-to-day use in tribal economies here. Sure, gold and silver flowed in and out thanks to trade, but for centuries, value was practical: dates, water, goats, stories, shelter. Trust mattered more than currency. And a man's word? Worth more than a ledger. Later, you wander the edge of the oasis and spot a child scratching a map into the dirt. Not a map of roads, there aren't many, but of wells. Places where the ground still remembers water. Places you'd never find on Google Maps. Her mother sees you watching and nods. Everything here moves, she says, except the memory of water. She tells you how the tribe migrated seasonally, not just because of temperature, but to let the land rest. They'd return to old grazing spots like old friends, checking for roots, replanting hardy herbs, gathering dry camel dung for fuel. This was an ecology with ethics. And the sky? That's the ceiling of the world. At night, it returns, stretched wide and velvet black, pricked with impossible stars. Someone points out a constellation used by early sailors and desert traders alike. You forget its name, but not the shape. A crooked smile of stars, like the skies in on a joke you haven't figured out yet. A young man teaches you how to read the wind by the way your scarf flutters. Another shows you how to talk to a goat, which turns out to just mean listening long enough that the goat gives up and follows you out of pity. You try both. You fail at both. But they appreciate the effort. And here, that's enough. Because this was a culture where hospitality wasn't optional. It was law. Before the Emirates, before skyscrapers, before the words Middle East became an anxious headline, there was this, a code of care. If a stranger appeared, you didn't ask why. You fed them first. 3 days before questions. 3 days of bread and water and peace. That's how long you had to offer refuge. That was the rule. Even now, the woman who washed dates earlier brings you a fresh palm frond mat to sleep on. No cold back, she says, and pats it twice. You watch the moon rise through the fronds. Someone hums a tune. Somewhere in the distance, a camel bell jingles, faint and sleepy. This is not a loud life. It is not easy, or fast, or shiny. But it has texture, woven, remembered, passed on. The water still runs. The stars still guide. The herbs still heal. And you? You begin to wonder how much you really need to survive, if maybe everything essential could fit in a pouch of time, a flask of date wine, and the story of a frog that got away. Morning arrives with wind, dry, warm, persistent. It rustles through the date palms and whistles across the sand like a wandering song. You rise slowly from your mat, brush grains of sand from your eyelashes, and follow the scent of hot tea and wood smoke to the center of the camp. Today's story begins not in tents or palm groves, but with movement. Because in pre-oil Arabia, mobility was survival. Caravans were more than just trade trains, they were lifelines. Arteries that pulsed across the land, pumping people, stories, goods, and gossip between the beating hearts of ancient cities and sleepy outposts. You sip your tea, bitter and strong, and prepare to join one of these caravans. It's already forming outside the camp. Camels grumble, ropes creak, packs shift. A boy with a wooden staff tries to coax a stubborn mule into line while another tightens the leather strap on a waterskin twice his size. Someone hands you a robe. You'll want this, they say. You will. Sand gets everywhere. Your caravan sets off just after sunrise. No engine noise. No tire marks. Just the rhythmic plod of camel feet and the quiet conversation of riders wrapped in wool and shadows. And everything has a place. Salt blocks tied beside sacks of dried fish. Indigo dye carefully sealed in animal bladders to keep it from spilling. Strings of pearls tucked into worn cloth bags, protected by nothing more than habit and hope. This isn't just commerce, it's choreography. You learn that caravans once stretched for miles, especially those carrying incense from southern Arabia, frankincense and myrrh worth more than gold. In fact, the trail you're following overlaps with what was once called the incense route, winding all the way from modern-day Oman to the Mediterranean. Mainstream historians agree, this incense was the stuff of emperors and priests. The Roman elite would burn it at banquets just to show off. And according to one fringe tale, Cleopatra once demanded an entire room be carpeted with frankincense ash, just to impress a particularly annoying diplomat. As the sun climbs, your guide teaches you how to read the land, not with maps, but with memory. A cluster of rocks shaped like a sleeping goat means a water well nearby. A dip in the horizon hints at a wadi, dry now but flooded during spring rains. Everything has meaning. You just have to squint the right way. Around midday, the caravan stops for rest. Tents unfurl like sails, and someone produces a dented copper pot of lentil stew. It's too hot, too salty, and absolutely perfect. A wrinkled elder pulls out a stringed instrument and plays a tune you somehow recognize, even though you've never heard it before. Song from Najran, he says. Older than the date trees. He tells you that before borders, before passports, before the word Saudi or Emirates ever existed, people here moved like wind. Tribes flowed across the land, loyal not to flags but to family, to honor, and to places where the water whispered just loud enough. Historians still argue whether these tribal allegiances were politically rigid or more fluid than we think. Some scholars suggest ancient Arabia had proto-democratic councils of elders, while others argue it was raw might that ruled. Either way, one thing is clear, trust was the currency, not gold. And breaking it could exile you farther than any desert ever could. After lunch, the guide shows you a leather-bound book filled with poems, yes, poems. Carried in a stolbag across hundreds of miles, passed down for generations. Line after line of longing, pride, thirst, stars, and camels. Poets here were like pop stars, he says. And sometimes generals. You chuckle, but it's true. In the days before oil, Arabic poetry was power, a way to settle disputes, insult enemies, praise lovers, or humiliate an entire tribe without shedding blood. One well-placed verse could echo across valleys for decades. Even now, at the next stop, a man trades a goat for the right to copy a stanza onto parchment. She'll be flattered, he mutters, rolling it up and tucking it into his sleeve. Quirky fact? Some poets would travel with their own bodyguards, just in case their rhymes started tribal feuds. Turns out words can bruise harder than spears. By dusk, you approach a caravanserai, a kind of ancient truck stop for camels and humans alike. Thick stone walls, a courtyard, rooms for merchants, pens for animals. Inside, the walls are covered in soot and handprints and carvings in multiple languages, Arabic, Persian, Greek, Tamil. Because this wasn't just Arab trade, it was world trade. One of the inscriptions translates to, salt for dates, silk for wool, stories for stories. You find a quiet corner and sit beside a flickering lamp. Across from you, a merchant from Damascus unwraps bolts of fabric dyed the color of crushed pomegranates. Another from Gujarat offers a tiny bottle of perfume made from sandalwood and lemon blossom. A third shows off a fossilized shark tooth, claiming it once belonged to a sea dragon. Everyone laughs, but no one doubts him. This is what travel was before planes and credit cards, a delicate, dusty magic. It took months, sometimes years. And when you arrived, no one handed you a map or a minibar key. They handed you tea and asked your grandmother's name. That night, lying beneath thick wool blankets under an open ceiling, you think of your own name scratched into the wall of that caravanserai. It's there now, forever, next to the others. You whisper it one more time before sleep takes you. Because in a world that moved constantly, the names we remembered mattered most. The morning doesn't greet you, it looms. The sky is a pale smear, the kind that promises heat without apology. You stir beneath your blanket, sticky with sweat, already regretting how you'll smell by midday. Welcome to the pre-oil Arab summer, where the sun is both clock and tyrant. You join the others by the well, splashing your face with cool water that tastes faintly of minerals and thyme. Today, you're headed for a coastal village. Yes, the desert people weren't just sandwalkers. They were seafarers too. The camel caravan gives way to donkeys, then to boats. And just like that, you're on the Gulf, bobbing in a dhow, a traditional wooden boat that creaks like it's gossiping about your weight. This region, before oil, thrived on a different kind of liquid treasure, pearls. You squint at the horizon, where dozens of other dhows float like driftwood, each crewed by men with lungs like bellows and nerves like braided rope. Pearl diving was not for the delicate. You're handed a nose clip and a rock. You're jumping, someone says with a grin. You hesitate. What's the rope for? To pull you back if you pass out. You probably won't survive this. But you do. You dive, ears popping, water squeezing your chest like a hungry genie. You fumble along the seafloor, grab a clam, and tug the rope like your life depends on it, which it does. Back on board, you cough up half the ocean and crack open the shell. Nothing. The crew laughs good-naturedly and hands you dates. You chew, sulking, but listen as they swap stories. Of pearls the size of eyeballs, of deals struck with merchants from India, Persia, even Venice. Here's a mainstream fact: before oil, the Gulf's pearl industry was globally famous. Some of the finest natural pearls worn by European aristocrats came from these waters. Now here's a quirky tidbit: divers would sometimes tie lucky crab claws or miniature Kuan pendants around their waists before jumping. Superstition was their scuba gear. By the time you reach shore, your ears ring and your skin itches with salt, but your curiosity grows. Inland, people were bartering camels and poems. On the coast, they were swimming for treasure and sending it halfway across the world. The village where you arrive is small but humming. Nets drying on the walls. Lanterns made from turtle shells. A man carving oars from mangrove wood hums an old tune as children weave palm fronds into baskets. You're welcomed into a home built of coral stone and date palm trunks. No air conditioning. Just clever architecture, wind towers that funnel breezes from above to cool the rooms below. Passive, silent, and brilliant. Historians still argue whether these towers were borrowed from Persia or independently invented here. Either way, you're thankful for them as you lie beneath one, letting the air soothe your sunburned limbs. A plate of food arrives, grilled fish, rice, dried limes, and something so spicy it turns your face the color of the setting sun. You recover just in time for the nightly gathering. The village square becomes a stage. Old men take turns telling stories. Not reading, telling. It's performance, memory, ritual. You hear tales of sea monsters guarding pearl beds, of shipwrecks so full of copper they turned the waves green, of a man who once faked a pearl by hiding sugar inside a clam and nearly married a merchant's daughter for it. You laugh along, knowing the truth is always slipperier than fiction here. Later, by firelight, someone mentions that the sea has moods. Some days, they whisper, it gives only shells. Other days, it swallows boats whole. They say this like it's a person, not a place. Because to coastal Arabs, the sea was alive. And here's where it gets philosophical. Before oil, survival wasn't just physical, it was emotional. People sang to the sea, danced for the rain, and carved their hopes into driftwood. You lie down that night in a room that smells of salt and smoked fish, your limbs sore but your mind drifting. Somewhere outside, the tide slinks back into the gulf like a thief with too many secrets. You remember the clam you found earlier, still empty. But you don't mind anymore. Because here, the real treasure isn't what's inside the shell. It's the story of how you got to open it. You wake with the rhythm of waves still sloshing behind your eyes, the sea echoing in your eardrums like the memory of a whisper. The village around you has already begun to stir. You can smell grilled flatbread and hear the low bleating of goats. But today, you don't stay long. You're headed inland again. Not to the vast empty quarters or the glittering oases, but to a place few outsiders ever think of when imagining Arabia, the mountains. Yes, mountains. Jagged, wind-sculpted, dark as burnt stone and older than nearly every story etched into the Quran. Some stretch along the coastlines of Oman, others ripple through parts of Yemen and Saudi Arabia, forming a spine of rock and silence. You ride a narrow path on a sure-footed donkey, hugging cliffs that make you question every life decision. The drop beside you is sheer, the sun directly overhead, and your only comfort is the dry wind that smells faintly of juniper and goat hair. By midday, you reach a village built right into the rock. Homes here are stacked like clay teacups, each one built of stone, mud, and stubbornness. The people wear earth-toned robes and smiles weathered by generations of sun and wind. You're greeted with coffee, spiced with cardamom, poured from long-spouted pots into tiny cups. No sugar. No milk. Just heat and grit and hospitality strong enough to knock you off your donkey. Now here's a mainstream fact. Arab highland communities were often self-sufficient, growing crops like wheat, barley, pomegranates, and coffee on steep terraces carved by hand. Imagine gardening on a staircase where one wrong step means death, and then doing it barefoot. You're led to a terrace. The view is dizzying. The mountains roll like frozen waves in every direction. Below, someone leads goats along a narrow pass, calling to them with high-pitched whistles that echo and vanish like ghosts. Later, you sit beside an elder whose beard is as gray as the cliffs, and who claims to remember a time before roads, before maps, before the outside world even cared that these mountains existed. Down there, he says, pointing toward the horizon, the people chase pearls and trade dates. But here, he taps the rock beneath you, we chase storms and stories. And it's true. The clouds gather here first. The monsoon winds rise and break against these mountains, bringing occasional summer rains. The people have learned to catch every drop, storing it in ancient cisterns carved into the hills. Here's a quirky tidbit: some mountaintop homes still have secret escape tunnels, not because of war, but in case of flash floods. You're beginning to understand that survival here requires creativity, not just courage. Evening falls like a thick shawl. The stars appear, bold, brash, closer than they seem down in the desert. A woman sings while grinding grain. Her voice carries across the valley. Somewhere, a flute answers. The melody isn't rehearsed, but everyone seems to know their part. Historians still argue whether these highland communities were more politically autonomous than their coastal cousins. Some claim the isolation bred independence, while others suggest they lived in constant quiet negotiation with lowland emirs and traveling imams. You ask the elder what he remembers most from his youth. He chuckles. Climbing barefoot. Dodging eagles. And the first time I tasted honey so fresh the bees hadn't even noticed it was gone. You're handed a chunk of raw mountain honeycomb. It glows amber in the lantern light and tastes like thyme and wild air. You chew slowly, watching the flame flicker. That night, you're given a place to sleep beneath a ceiling of woven reeds. The wind slips through the stone slits in the wall, cool and restless. The call to prayer rises early, echoing not just once, but again and again, as each village along the ridge answers with its own song, like a chain of faith across the peaks. You pull your blanket tighter, listening. It's not a lullaby. But it'll do. Because here, before oil, before skyscrapers, before anyone asked how much your land was worth, there was this, stone, sky, silence, and a people who made lives out of steepness. And as your eyes finally close, you realize, even up here, far from everything, the Arab world had already found its treasures. They just weren't shiny. The final leg of your journey leads you back to the coast. But this time, it's not the bustling pearl towns or the towering mud brick cities that call you. It's something softer, quieter. A fishing village wrapped in salt, smoke, and stories. The air smells of seaweed and dried anchovies. Wooden boats, hand-carved and salt-stained, bob lazily in the tide. Nets hang from every pole like tattered prayer flags, and old men squat barefoot mending holes with movements so practiced, they barely glance at the string. You settle into this world like a shell into wet sand. The pace here is a yawn. The laughter is low. The fish are always either too many or too few. Children dash along the beach chasing crabs. Their mothers call to them from shaded porches, holding plates of dates, dried shark, and flatbread still hot from the coals. You chew slowly, the bread smoky and sweet with crushed fennel. Here's a mainstream fact for you: before oil, many coastal Arab communities survived almost entirely on fishing and seasonal pearl diving. Some families did both. One month they pulled oysters from the sea, the next they hauled sardines in by the boatload. The ocean was the pantry, the clock, and the cruel master. But what you didn't know, what no textbook ever really explains, is how spiritual it all was. Every journey to sea began with a prayer. Every large catch ended with a feast and a song. Pearlers often wrote poetry underwater, scratched into slates between dives. Whole verses were dedicated to fish that got away, storms that nearly drowned them, or wives they swore they'd come home to. A quirky tidbit: divers used to stuff their ears with cotton and hold turtle shell clips over their noses, descending up to 30 meters with nothing but lung capacity and sheer nerve. Some swore they could hold their breath for nearly 2 minutes. Most, of course, lied. The boatmasters sang long, rhythmic work chants as the divers leapt in, over and over, chasing oysters and dreams through salt and shadow. You hear those songs now, faint in the background, repeated by men cleaning their boats for the morning tide. Historians still argue whether the pearl trade empowered these communities or trapped them in a brutal cycle of debt to merchants and rulers. What's not up for debate is this: it was hard. Blisteringly hard. And still, they did it, again and again. You wander inland just a little and find a crumbling watchtower, its stones sun-bleached and bird-nested. From here, centuries ago, villagers would have scanned the sea not just for pirates, but for returning dhows, boats bearing husbands, sons, and luck. You sit inside it, watching gulls spiral over the harbor, and let your mind drift back through everything you've seen: the desert caravans, the incense valleys, the starlit mountaintops, the roaring markets, the whispered prayers, the laughter around coffee fires. And then, very gently, we begin to slow down. You stretch out under the rising stars, your journey's weight softening across your chest like a heavy wool blanket. The wind carries the briny breath of the sea, layered with whispers of cardamom, sweat, and sun-warmed stone. It brushes against your skin like a goodbye you're not quite ready for. Somewhere behind you, a door creaks. A lantern is dimmed. The waves kiss the shore over and over, tireless, soft, ancient. You've walked through lives that weren't yours, through cities that hummed and deserts that stung and mountains that sang. You've seen the world before the pipelines, before the politics, before the headlines. A world still tangled in trade winds, in sandalwood smoke, in prayers for rain. And as your breath deepens, as your thoughts begin to float like driftwood, you realize something gentle and unshakable: there was wealth here long before oil. Not gold, not coin, but stories. Rituals. Resilience. The kind of riches no empire could extract, no company could bottle, no war could burn. So as you lay there, heavy with time, let it all dissolve. The camels, the coffee, the pearl songs, the date palms. Let the ancient wind sing them to sleep beside you. You've traveled far, little explorer. And tomorrow, you'll wake up somewhere softer. But for now, the lantern's out. The stories are done. The sand is cool. And your pillow is the past. Good night.